This is The Blockchain Show. The Blockchain Show is a podcast that demystifies cryptocurrencies and distributed ledger technology. You're listening to episode number 63, where Ethan and I goof off because Mark and Ian didn't hand in anything professional to us.
We have an interview coming up with Brian Platz of Fluree, which is a blockchain-based database.
Wait a minute. What?
It's really I am going to have to listen to it a couple more times.
I thought those two words...
Yeah, we'll insert a clip right here.
Bring.
About Andreas Antonopoulos.
What exactly is going on here? Is this the greatest technological innovation and explosion of innovation since the mobile internet, or maybe even the internet itself? Or is this the greatest load of hype ever arranged around a technology in the history of technology? Both. And in fact, that's a characteristic of advanced technologies. I often say that where Bitcoin and the other open blockchains are today is approximately where the internet is in 1992. In terms of technology, in terms of infrastructure deployment, in terms of adoption patterns, this technology is approximately where the internet was in 1992. But the hype around blockchain is exactly where the hype around the internet was in 1998. You know what comes next. There will be a shakeout. When the waters recede, you can tell who on the beach wasn't wearing a swimsuit. They stand there naked. It's an empty promise. This will happen in the blockchain space. There is a lot of bullshit being peddled to VCs, to investors, to initial coin offering buyers, to uneducated investors. There's a lot of Ponzi schemes. There's a lot of pyramid schemes. There's a lot of empty promises. There's also a lot of business as usual disguised as innovation, disguised as disruptive technology. And so we're at this strange moment where the underlying technology really is, truly is, massively disruptive, massively innovative. The amount of research that's happening today in applied cryptography is unprecedented. We are looking at the largest civilian deployment of public key cryptography ever. Because it turns out that people only protect keys when those keys are attached to value, and nothing teaches someone security fast enough than having their Bitcoin on a Windows machine. Holding your own Bitcoin very quickly changes your attitude towards information security. You didn't care about your photos. Some didn't even care about your sexy photos. You didn't care about your location, and then Bitcoin happened. And suddenly you're on a steep learning curve and getting better every day. Now you're telling your friends about two-factor authentication, and you're horrified to remember how you used to practice security because storing value has this unique ability to focus your mind on the aspects of security that matters. So this technology is driving this groundswell of security awareness. It's driving the most incredible research in applied cryptography we've ever seen. Some of you are probably quite technical. You're involved in computer science. You've seen what's happening here. Nobody thought that we would be doing applied Schnorr signatures. Nobody thought we'd be looking at advanced elliptic curve applications. Nobody thought we'd be doing things like ring signatures and range proofs for confidential transactions. The state of anonymity and privacy is advancing rapidly. We're building a whole new world in terms of cryptography, and this is applied cryptography on the largest cryptographically secured network the world has ever seen. That's not business as usual. It's highly disruptive. Now, out of that came this fantastic saying, blockchain is the technology behind Bitcoin, which is incorrect. Blockchain is one of the 4 foundational technologies behind Bitcoin, and it can't stand alone. But that hasn't stopped people from trying to sell it. Blockchain is Bitcoin with a haircut and a suit that you parade in front of your board. It's the ability to deliver a sanitized, clean, comfortable version of Bitcoin, to people who are too terrified of actually disruptive technology. And so you get into this very strange world where the words no longer mean anything. Can you define blockchain for me? I think a few people in this room could probably define blockchain, but the real challenge would be, can you define blockchain in such a way that I can't do search and replace with the word database and still make that sentence work? Because that's the challenge. If what you're doing is a database with signatures, it's not interesting. It's boring. What is the essence of Bitcoin? It's not blockchain. The essence of Bitcoin is the ability to operate in a decentralized way without having to trust anyone. The essence of Bitcoin is to be able to use software to authoritatively, independently, without appeal to authority, verify everything yourself. You don't trust the other nodes you're talking to. You assume they're lying. You don't trust the miners. You don't trust the people creating the transactions. You don't trust anything other than the outcome of your own verification and validation. And through that, you end up trusting in something more important, the network effect. Bitcoin introduced the concept of decentralized security through computation. And this has not yet sunk in. What Bitcoin does is it allows you to replace a security model that is based around concentric circles of access and control with an institution in the center, with a security model that is inside out, open and accessible to everyone. A security model that is based on market forces and game theory. It is the first market-based security model, where a series of incentives and punishments ensure that the ultimate result is you can trust the platform itself as a neutral arbiter that is not controlled by anyone, without third parties, without intermediaries. Bitcoin revolutionizes trust. Now, it's difficult to have that conversation if you only focus on Bitcoin. And arguably, a lot of people have said, but it's not just about currency. What about the other applications? And it's not just about Bitcoin. What about the other blockchains? And so in that sense, the term blockchain means something. But only if you define it very, very narrowly. I use the qualifier open to talk about open blockchain. What I'm interested in is the applications of this technology that enable you to run a decentralized, trustless system that does not rely on anyone as an intermediary of trust. Because that is the disruption here. That is the essence of this technology. So that essence is seen in other systems. Ethereum exhibits it for the application of smart contracts. But those smart contracts only work if you don't have to trust anyone to execute the smart contract correctly. And you can only trust that that's going to happen if everyone can participate in an open manner and verify each other. If access to the underlying consensus algorithm in mining is open to everyone. And so out of these characteristics come the power of these blockchains technologies. Open. And that's the key word.
When we first started this podcast in May of 2016, we were learning all about this new technology, and I don't know about you, Ethan, but my head was exploding. I think we have record of my brain exploding as I learned about all the new possibilities. It's funny, though, that it's like the comedy of it is that it's not, these things were always possible. I just never had the idea put in my head until then. That's, the funny thing. It just seemed like there were no other choices, right? Like, this is how it is. This is how you do it. Fit in, or... So any opportunity that's different, I was like, woo, let's ride this wave. This is exciting and new.
And then in the last 2 years, we've seen it get fucked.
No. I think it's all in my lens. It always is in my lens, right? I mean, I'm not saying everybody who's listening is concerned with my lens. I'm talking about the individual and how it is that the individual sees it and how the choices that we have. So let's just talk a little bit about choices that we have before we move on, if you don't mind. Well, anyway, I gotcha. So,
if they mind, they can just skip forward to the interview.
Well, yes, and I just have had thoughts that, like, I don't want to lose the sense of. Here's what I'm really thinking about. I don't want to lose the point, the excitement, the great thing. And now I don't really watch TV, but I understand that it's like everybody's talking about it and everybody's embroiled about debating and polarizing all over again. If it's Bitcoin or Ethereum, how is it doing today compared to the dollar, compared to something else, compare.
Can we just talk about that for a second? Because
Sure.
I call it the crypto crash.
Okay.
It's not really what it was, but it sounds cool.
Yeah.
Bitcoin dropped down to 10,000 last week.
It's funny because when we started this, it was like 300 something.
Yeah, we had an all-time high around 20, and now last night it was back up to 12,000. So,
okay,
hang in there, crypto fans.
Well, that's my point. It's like, who gives a fuck is what I'm saying. Who gives a fuck? Not necessarily who gives a fuck about. Is it? I'm not saying let's not examine whether or not if it's like this path to freedom. Like, I'm cruising, I'm surfing the wave of excitement, but I have to pay attention to the undercurrents, or I might. Who knows where I'm going to end up. So is it a path to freedom, or is it a trap for more control? Ugh. Okay, but what's the takeaway, right?
The takeaway is that it has the potential to be very, very powerful tool.
Right.
But much like the cotton gin, it can also be used to enslave us more.
Right. The printing press can print out
the Bible, or it can print out the anarchist cookbook.
I just think it's important to note that I would like to, let's just say, suggest to all of our listeners that it is not my intention anyway to replace the love of money with the love of Bitcoin. And I mean, I really don't. In all seriousness, this isn't the Bitcoin podcast. No. This is the Blockchain Show podcast, because Bitcoin can explode and turn into a bubble, and whatever happens with Bitcoin, I don't want to attach myself too much to anything that I can't honorably walk away from. And I'm not attached to Bitcoin, because you know what? Not a lot of people donated to the show. So the more I explore these ideas, the more it comes down to what the wise people in my life have always told me. Don't give away your power, Sarah.
So we built a blockchain-based database, and really it's targeted towards enterprise kind of applications. Why we built it is because we have been building enterprise software, myself and my co-CEO, Flip Filipowski, my business partner, for quite a while. I've been doing it for over 20 years now, and he a decade or two longer than I. So one of the things that we really wanted to do was kind of take some of this enterprise software experience we had and some of the excitement that we had for blockchain and the implications for it, and apply it into a product that we thought could be more accessible for enterprises to start using. We see a lot of proof of concepts and ideas going out there, and what we're hoping to do is jumpstart some of those ideas and actually get some of these things into production via an approach that people can hopefully get their arms around a little bit easier than some of the existing technologies.
That's excellent, and it's something that I've been really looking forward to seeing in 2018. More tools, services, and processes that can bring the benefits of blockchain to organisations and individuals that are not fully versed in that underlying technology, and because gain the benefits. Hopefully they don't need to be fully versed in the underlying technology, much in the way of cloud computing. I don't necessarily care how Amazon or Google have assembled racks full of servers and how they plug them into each other to provide me with those cloud services. What I want to know is that they're there, they're available, accessible, and I can get the benefits from them quickly. So it's really, really exciting, really promising to see that you're kind of playing in that space, bringing the benefits easier to people who don't necessarily code or don't necessarily understand the full details behind the blockchain technology.
Yeah, our hope is that really someone who has worked with a database before, so in that case, they probably at least know a little bit how to code, but people are used to using a database in every application that they build. And we don't want them to have to kind of shift their paradigm of the stack of a typical app. So, I think right now, at least in the absence of Fluree, most of the technologies that I see are ones that you really do need to adapt the stack. You're bringing in a whole different sort of process into what you're building, and the tools to do that are kind of difficult to get your arms around. And I don't meet that many people actually who really have the aptitude to do this. It's a pretty small bunch, but yeah, our hope is that if you've ever used a database, you know how to use a database, then that is about all the knowledge that you need to get started. And of course, if you're trying to do more sophisticated things with the blockchain part of the database, then that's going to require a bit more knowledge about how some of those aspects work. But that shouldn't preclude you from getting some of the benefits from it and being able to get started right away.
Given we've got quite a broad listener base of technologists through to curious individuals who are not technologists, how would you describe the benefits and the differences between running a blockchain-based database and a traditional server or cloud-hosted database?
Yeah, so one of the things that we're trying to do is hope that it really doesn't matter if you even need the blockchain capability, that we're providing a fantastic database that you might choose over any other database. And that's been a real design goal for us the whole time we were building it. We wanted to make sure that even if you didn't care about blockchain, this should be one of the best databases you've ever used. And of course, we have the side benefit of this blockchain capability. So just a couple high-level characteristics of what we've built. It is a graph database. So it's sort of a relational database plus. So we do mimic relational databases because that's what people are familiar with in many ways, but we extend that with a graph database capability, which we think aligns just really well with today's applications. That's kind of more naturally how applications need data. So graph database is pretty good at delivering that. It's also a completely immutable database. And immutable meaning that when your application gets a database, that database is locked in at a point in time. It will never change. And of course, the database itself might be getting updates and so on. But in order to get those updates, you would essentially ask for an updated version or a new version. And this doesn't have to be complicated or anything. You just basically, if you're building a web app, a request comes in and you grab a database, you do your work, and half a second later, you return a result. But during that half a second, you can have the comfort that the database itself will never change underneath you. And this really eliminates a whole suite of issues. So most databases, the majority of them, don't have this characteristic. So the whole time you're trying to do work over that half a second, the data is changing underneath you, and that can introduce errors and things. So that's an important characteristic that we've brought. Another is that we have the ability to actually introspect these queries, meaning just examine queries you send to the database and know exactly what potential updates would affect your queries. And this allows us to actually stream data to applications and make them real time, but be able to do this in a way that really requires no additional effort for the developers. And we've been talking, or a lot of these examples are around this notion of immutability. And one of the things that we're able to do is not only lock in a database at a point in time as the request is coming in, but we can actually allow you to query a database at any point historically since the genesis of that particular database and get an instantaneous result. So this allows you to actually build entire applications that have time travel in them without, again, the developer really needing to do anything extra. And so those are some of the, I guess, features that maybe you wouldn't see in a typical database that we explore. And a lot of this is just an opportunity to take some of the, I guess, ideas we have about what a database should do, because this is the way databases have worked for 40 years, and say, well, do we really have to do it this way? Let's maybe try some other ways of doing things and see if we can introduce some new capability.
Yeah, and I've taken a glance through your white papers and your documentation and your website over the past couple of days, and yeah, certainly it's talking the right language. As a technologist, and it's not kind of saying, oh, this is all dependent on blockchain, and you need to go away and on a vision quest for blockchain before you can access this. It is talking in more modern development terms and database terms, use of GraphQL and more modern interfaces, and the use of React and other JavaScript frameworks, so that you can start using it. You can, it's there, it's accessible and robust, and brings those characteristics and benefits that you talked about. So it's, really, I'd encourage our listeners to go and check out your documentation and your website, and we'll of course put the links on our show notes as usual.
Yeah, sure. And there's actually a beta out there as well that anyone can register. You just need an email address to register for it, so you can actually play. We host the database for you, so you don't have to worry about setting it up or doing anything, but you can actually get a sense as to what it can do.
Okay, cool. Still talking on the subject of blockchain and decentralized database and your database product, and we may come on to some of the other things that you're doing as well in parallel to that. But I'm aware of several organizations kind of trying to standing up or trying to stand up a blockchain database. The ties.db is one that I'm aware of, but I think there are many out there, or several out there, trying to implement these in parallel. Do you foresee a bit of a war coming along in that space, where there's a jostling for position for bringing things to market the quickest or best? Do you see a lot of competition from your space, or you're just getting on with what you do best?
Well, we're getting on with what we do best. And certainly we have seen really just one other project kind of in this space. I have not heard of TiesDB. I'll have to check that out. But oftentimes when you're starting up any sort of technology company or idea, for every company you can find that is doing something that you're doing, there's really 1,000 more that you haven't found yet that are also trying to do the same thing. As long as it's a reasonable idea, and I guess that gets to the heart of your question. I think this is not only a reasonable idea, it is a way that blockchain, I think, fits very naturally into enterprise development in the context of a database. And therefore, I do feel like this is going to be one of the main ways that blockchain capabilities and benefits do get embedded into apps. And that's not to say that there isn't going to be a space for, the Ethereum sort of side of the world. In fact, I view the Ethereum sort of side of the world, and when you look at a traditional app development stack, you usually have an application server that's responsible for most of your business logic. And Ethereum was really designed to do this. But the other key part of your application stack is always the database. And there have not been and really aren't true database technologies that leverage blockchain within them. So we think we're one of the first to do that, and we're doing it in a way that's still natural from an application standpoint, or how you think about applications. And between us and, for example, Ethereum, we think there's a lot of synergies. There will be a little overlap. We have had to build in the ability to create custom code, custom functions to set up rules that govern who can update data, which data can be updated, what conditions, data can be updated in. And that code that we've developed, or that can actually run directly in the database blockchain could be used to accomplish some things that are smart contract like that you would typically go to Ethereum for. So there's a little bit of overlap there, but for the most part, we sort of think as Ethereum as the app server, and we're the database. We're really good at housing a lot of data that you can ask very expressive questions to, which most blockchains aren't very good at. And of course, Ethereum's focused more on that business logic, and just even give an example of that. And I don't know what, based on the price fall today, I don't know what it would be, but to store like a gigabyte of data on the Ethereum blockchain would cost you somewhere around 5 to 10 million US dollars. Obviously, it's not designed to house data like that, but if you have a data requirement for the application you're building, that's kind of what you're facing. And in contrast, we're all about housing data and a little less so on running apps in a virtual machine. So I think it's a nice complement, makes a lot of sense. And I think we're probably going to see a good number of projects trying to target this space.
That sounds pretty good. What sort of challenges do you face? You must have challenges around performance, or what other elements have you had with the platform?
Yeah, so I think there's maybe a underappreciation by at least a lot of people how much consensus costs when you talk about a public blockchain. And of course, in today's public blockchain, that cost really comes in two factors: time, transactional time, and the second is money, actual cost to push a transaction through. So when you have really broad consensus across a global set of computers, certainly there's a lot of strategies you can do on the cost side. But the time side is kind of one of those where there is this glass ceiling that it's really going to be difficult to get global networks of computers to coordinate consensus that quickly. And there's a lot of new strategies coming up that are gaining some degree of popularity, like IOTA with the notion of their tangles, or really their directed graphs that they're using under the hood, or hash graph, that are promising to do much higher volume transactions. So how we've addressed this idea is that when you create an application and you want the data for that application to reside on the blockchain, there's going to be parts of this database that you do want full global consensus for. And you just need to be willing to pay the price for that, because there is going to be a time hit for doing those things. But a lot of the application data that perhaps you need to store doesn't require that level of consensus. Maybe part of it is something you're sharing with a supply chain network of 20 other companies. And in that case, where you have basically you already have a predefined small list of who the miners are, you can achieve consensus incredibly quick. And then, even so, there might be aspects where you just want to run the database internally. You want maybe the benefit of the tamper resistance that the blockchain gives. But the reason you might do that is because you want to actually store internal data that you don't want external, but maybe links or joins to that external data. There's a lot of talk around the protection laws, of course, that the European Union is in the middle of instituting. And perhaps there is data about individuals that is in this public blockchain database, but you don't ever want to reveal any personally identifiable information. You could store that in the public database blockchain, but not include the PII, and run a database internally that essentially joins the PII for that. And of course, if the person wants to be forgotten, you just delete the personally identifiable information you're storing internally. The external data has no ties to any particular individuals. So it's an example of where in a single sort of application, you might have some data running internally, private sort of consensus mode, and some data in the full public consensus mode, but your applications are joining data across that. So this is the core to that scalability question for us. We can do approximately 1,000 transactions per second. And of course, the more consensus you put around that, that is going to slow down just because of physics and coordination. But you can only segment just the pieces of data that need that extra coordination to have that extra coordination. It doesn't need to slow down your application.
Okay, cool. And as part of that consensus piece, you talked also about the cost of the transaction. How does that influence your kind of price point and your offer to the market? And how do you put a cost on that?
Yeah, so ultimately, I think like a lot of the current blockchains, there's going to be the market will ultimately decide what that is. One of the ways that we can help minimize that is provide efficient consensus methods so that people don't need to run, $20,000 ASIC computers to essentially mine a block. And obviously they're going to have to be able to pay for those. So making sure we're very efficient around the consensus side, making sure that the requirements to actually process database transactions don't require a massive amount of computing resources to actually do that. And then on the storage side, storage is certainly a factor, but the cost of storage is so amazingly cheap today that we can actually do that trade-off where we can leverage more storage to sort of pre-compute data very, very cheaply and efficiently and be able to not push that off on the overall running of a particular computer. So those are things we can control. We can try and make it cheap and efficient to actually help run databases in the cloud with Fluree. The parts that we can't necessarily control are what the market is going to end up charging for these transactions. And I was in particular really interested in watching Ethereum when the price here, tripled over the past month, that the cost of doing transactions on Ethereum, which are really pretty well tied to the computing resources that are needed to do them, also tripled. Even though, of course, the cost of computers to do those didn't triple in that time, only Ethereum, the price of Ethereum tripled. But the transaction fees never were sort of pegged to the Ethereum cost. And so, the marketplace has a lot of kind of weird things going on, but in theory, the transaction cost price shouldn't have gone up that much. It did. Yeah. It's very difficult for us to predict what that will end up being or what kind of, when things settle out, what sort of market dynamics end up coming into play here.
Okay, interesting. Now, talking on the subject of, you mentioned enterprise, that this is an offering that you want to pitch at enterprises to the problems that they have today. I'm aware of, some enterprises, they're only kind of just getting their head around cloud. How do you pitch this to them? How do you approach those enterprises? How do you make them aware of this as a solution when you've got an awful lot of noise in the cloud space? You've got some huge vendors and cloud vendors in the marketplace. How do you get enterprises to notice you?
Yeah, I always talk about our marketing, and I've always believed this. It's what I call a ground game. There aren't that many Hail Mary passes, so a lot of it is hard work. This doesn't just happen overnight. So we do a number of things. We talk to a lot of the large consulting companies who are currently getting pulled in for some organizations for projects around blockchain and make sure that they have this tool in their tool belt. So that's one important way. Certainly talking to some of the industry analysts that have been dealing around either databases or blockchain is another important way. We're doing a lot of meetups. We're trying to get in front of the development audience and actually demonstrate the product, show them what it can do, how it can save them time and energy, and what kind of new benefits blockchain has. So that's a particular way. In many ways, we are fortunate, though, that we have been, as I mentioned, in this enterprise software world for a long time. We have actually built and founded 2 companies that ended up being publicly traded companies on the NASDAQ. And because of that, we've established a pretty good network over the years where we're able to reach out to people and they at least give us 5 minutes, to pitch what we have as opposed to completely shutting us down. So in many ways, we're lucky. In many ways, it's just hard work.
That's always the way, isn't it? It always involves a little bit of hard work somewhere along the line before you actually gain success. For the people out there, what are the limitations compared to the standard database held both locally and also in a cloud, if any?
Yeah, I would say that if you were going to pick on a limitation, it's this potentially upper threshold we're putting on it of about 1,000 transactions per second. And we feel pretty good about that because we think that, at least for the most part, almost every application we've ever built, that's plenty. They do not have a larger requirement than that. But there are certain types of applications, maybe storing mass amounts of log files, for example, where you actually need higher transactional volumes than that. And there's a good chance we will not be a good fit in that scenario. We do actually allow you to shard, we call it partition, an individual database into pieces that potentially could even solve that log file problem. But you lose some of the ACID characteristics of database transaction, this idea that a transaction will always succeed or always fail and is always consistent. And of course, that's very important for businesses, especially anything around financial aspects. You know, if you're transferring 2 tokens from person A to person B and the transaction failed halfway between, you know, it deducted them from one but never got it to deposit into the other, that wouldn't be a good situation. And you did ask about other database projects, and one of the things that I will mention is at least the one that I'm most aware with is really built around a non-ACID sort of compliant database. Which means it can't really have this characteristic. It's built on top of it. And I guess that would contrast to us in that this is a completely ground up, brand new database technology that we have built, and certainly having things important to enterprise users like ACID compliant transactions is core to it. But yeah, I would say the big thing is probably the transactional volume. Like I said, we think most applications, 90+%, that'll be more than enough for. And then beyond that, there are just really a host of features that people are not used to getting out of a database that we have included in this database, some out of necessity to be able to run a database completely decentralized, and some because the technology today allows us to do some interesting things that technology even 5-10 years ago made sort of difficult. So mostly I think we're adding new things. We're taking away very little that a traditional database would give you.
Cool, thank you. So we talked quite a bit about the database. I'd like to also ask a little bit about your apps platform and the kind of the serverless technologies that you're bringing to the table there in conjunction with the database. What can you tell us about?
Yeah, so we have built a application server side of this already, and in fact, we built a couple applications that are currently running in production using FlureeDB, our blockchain database. One of the reasons was it fulfills kind of this vision that we're setting out to accomplish, which is this idea that anyone can build applications or application functionality, can seamlessly share them. And instead of everything being centralized around these software as a service providers like a Salesforce.com or a Workday, instead these modules of functionality can actually be pulled together dynamically and run dynamically by anybody and run locally right next to their data. So you don't even have to like send your data across the internet or anything like that if you don't want to. And this all gets to this kind of upper part of the stack and what we're ultimately trying to accomplish. Now, the only thing we've really released so far is the database part of it. And this database is a massive project, and we will be consumed with this, I'm sure, for the majority of 2018. So the App Factory part isn't something that I expect us to put out in beta, at least in the short term. But in a nutshell, it takes microservices written in any programming language. It containerizes them, and it assembles and chains them together using some dependency management and allows them to execute on demand. And so if anyone's used any of the serverless technologies out there, like probably the most popular being Amazon's AWS Lambda, it's very similar to that, except the idea is that you can actually pull these services right into your local environment and run them locally. You don't have to go to a cloud provider to run them. And then the other thing that we've done is we've really optimized these for startup speeds, because a lot of enterprise applications use languages like Java. Java is really, really slow to start an AWS Lambda. It takes a long time to get an app up and running. And we've done some tricks where we actually take the memory state of the application itself and actually run these containers from the memory state, as opposed to loading them up fresh. But really the whole idea is, assembling these microservices, and they only take compute capacity while they're running. And when they're not running, they shut down, and we can start them up so fast, it will feel like they were running on a cluster of servers the whole time, ready for you to just call them.
Excellent. I'm also aware of a couple of other projects, I think, looking at the serverless and the app kind of paradigm for blockchain. Again, do you see yourself kind of ahead of the competition, behind the curve, right on the curve? What's your perception of that kind of community of projects building out the apps and the serverless platforms?
We didn't necessarily have a strong desire to actually build out our entire application serverless platform, and I would be more than happy to use someone else's project. We just couldn't find any that met our list of requirements. And maybe in a year's time, someone will actually have one that met our requirements, and we will probably use theirs. So we're not like super attached to this, or we're attached to the idea or bringing together some of the benefits that we think the combination of a decentralized database with this type of technology can bring together. And just no one had built either of these things yet, so we had to go along the task of building them.
We talked about AWS Lambda as one of those kind of traditional cloud alternatives for serverless computing. Do you foresee the big cloud players, the Googles, the Amazons, the Microsoft Azures, kind of waking up to some of these new projects and new technologies based on blockchain and getting involved and either swallowing you up or your competition up, or starting to build out their own programs of work in this space?
Yeah, I don't know. Amazon has jumped into a lot of different categories, and certainly Google and everyone are pretty excited about what they're doing. I don't know how they're going to end up reacting to this. Part of the idea here is that, for example, with FlureeDB, is that you have fully decentralized databases, and some of the same benefits that a centralized database has in this decentralized manner. Why wouldn't you run it decentralized? Why do you want to depend on any particular provider to do things like this for you? Which to me means it's a threat to AWS. That if people with computer networks all over the world can dynamically run these applications without having to, throw up 50 virtual machines in AWS, and if it's still fast and cost competitive, why would you even go to AWS? So I don't know how they're going to react to this. And I don't know which segments of the market are going to be pulled towards this model first. I think that the whole pie is, so to speak, is growing so quickly that everyone's tide is going to rise in this. But I think that kind of this category of decentralized applications is going to start to eat a slice of this pie. And eventually, when the whole pie isn't growing, it's going to mean that it's actually taking market share away from these particular cloud providers. But there's a lot of smart people at these places, and they're thinking about a lot of things. And so I don't know how they're going to react, but I actually see some of this technology a long-term threat to some of these types of providers.
Recently, before Christmas and leading up to the first couple of weeks of January, we've seen that rise in Ethereum that you mentioned before. Conversely, past few days, we've seen quite a significant drop, reasonably significant drop in the value of most cryptocurrencies out there. Is that kind of affecting the way you think about your offering? Is that you talked about waiting for almost a stabilization? How do you try and apply that standard value of your offering in this market?
It is there's a lot of craziness obviously going out there, and we have people coming to us quite frequently, launching blockchain projects, doing ICOs. They really don't even know how they're going to build the backing technology for this. And, one of the questions we get as much as almost any other is, hey, can we just use, your database to do this? And then, of course, our ICO makes sense. And, some of it's a little bit nutty. And how does that affect us when some of that nuttiness, I think, leads to volatility in the overall cryptocurrency market, or whatever ends up leading to volatility? And the answer is we don't worry about it all that much. We have been actually building this technology for 3 years. We have a lot of experience in this space, so we have a good grasp on what the market needs. And our focus isn't around the current valuations of cryptocurrencies. It's around building great technology that we're confident people will use and solve problems. And as long as we stay focused on that, there is going to be some of this backdrop that we can't control. But we think the technology we build is going to be very viable and have a life out there. And it's, at least at this point, it doesn't affect our thinking a whole lot. And it's something that I guess we're going to anticipate that we're going to see quite a bit of.
Okay, cool.
And what about the cost of using this new platform? How does that compare to existing services?
Yeah, so there's a couple ways of running it. There's the full public blockchain, where the cost we mentioned before is going to be somewhat market driven. I mean, we're not going to have a direct control over that cost. We can only control trying to make that as efficient as possible for people to participate in. But running it in a private blockchain, so sort of like you would run a IBM Hyperledger kind of stack, or some of these other private blockchain stacks that are coming to fruition, the cost there can be zero, because our technology is free. It's open source database, and people can, get it's a Java base. So any computer that runs Java, you can basically run a jar file and run the database. And how we will end up monetizing that is hopefully there will be some sort of economic opportunity for us around the public blockchain part of FlureeDB once we do launch it. But within the enterprise, we see a lot of people using this and needing, they need certainly support services. Obviously, if I'm running this in a supply chain and something's very business critical in there and something's not working right, they need people they can call to go ahead and work on it. And then like that, we'll probably have a certified version of the database, one that goes through a battery of tests, and then, the open source version of the database, which continually grows, but maybe on a less frequent basis. We're sort of pulling off a stable branch, and we're running that through a lot more rigor. And then companies also need protection against patents and indemnity. I mean, if they're running these sorts of things, they want to know that they have some sort of recourse if someone comes and says, hey, you're violating patents, you need to shut this database down. And that's another aspect that we can help provide these companies. And all of these tools that and capabilities we will offer around this database, but anyone can run the database for free. And, if they want some of these enhanced tools, or they want someone to call that can answer questions right away, or they want some protection around patent indemnity, then we'll be able to offer some of these for a fee.
Cool. I've got a question. It's probably one of my last questions, and it's around the sort of the legislation and regulations piece that we touched on earlier, and you touched on maybe that's part of your service offerings. I have, in my experience, found it quite difficult and interesting to explain to some customers and some users of cloud technology the fact that, well, they can't actually go and inspect the data center anymore. They can't take a guy around to inspect that the racks are secured, or that there's sufficient physical security around those data centers, because that's kind of not what cloud does. and the data could be sitting anywhere in a number of physical locations somewhere around Dublin in Ireland, or somewhere in West Virginia, or wherever it might be. How do you foresee kind of those kind of conversations coming when somebody who traditionally has liked to know or needed to know physically where data is sitting, and how do you explain to them that, well, actually change your thinking, make sure that it is I guess secure, just it's in a locked room with a security guard sitting outside of it?
Yeah, I think an employee leaves your organization, you have to make sure you disable their access to certain types of the data that they might, or accounts they have access to, within 24 hours, and you have to prove that you consistently do that, et cetera. I think that if we can start using things like a blockchain database to actually house the records and the workflows of when these activities are coming, then auditors certainly can very easily go to a central source to validate that different things happened and when they happened and who they happened by. And some of that data can even get exposed directly to the users of these systems, so that they have visibility into this. And right now, these types of audits cost a lot of money, and it's because you go to Price Waterhouse or someone like that, or I'm sorry, like a Grant Thornton, and they're going to come in and put 2 or 3 associates in your office for 3 weeks, and they're going to ask for email records, and they're going to ask for this log and that log, and just try and find any sort of inconsistency where maybe you have not abided by these sort of controls. And I just see this world where if you're actually storing your controls themselves in exactly when and what happens in a central database, all of a sudden those people have a lot less work to do, because you actually have incredibly tamper-resistant proof that shows exactly when and how all this stuff happened, and you only have one place to go and look for it. So I think that whole auditing and all of the, ties into your question, all of this compliance-related aspect is going to get shaken up a bit, and, for the better if you're a service provider, and maybe for the worst if your job is being an auditor. Excellent.
And that is a really good answer and covers all bases. Briefly, and I know our listeners are very interested in contact details, but before we ask you about contact details and how people get involved with the platform, what's your roadmap for the coming year or so? Yeah, so we have the public beta version out right now that anyone, as we mentioned earlier, can sign up and just start using. We intend to bring that out of public beta and start releasing it as a standalone application that companies can run private blockchain databases with in the second quarter of this year. So really in the coming, months. And by the end of the year, we intend to launch the full public blockchain version of this product. So it's going to be a busy year for us, but we plan to have this fully out the door by the end of 2018. Excellent. Looking forward to that. And what we do is check in with you sometime in the future and see how that's going. So, Brian, people who are interested in learning more, finding out more, and using the platform, where do they go to? How do they find you? Easiest way is our website, which is Fluree, FLUR.ee. So you can go there, you can sign up for the beta there, and of course we have a contact form there, phone numbers, however you want to get in touch with us. Excellent.
I have signed up for the beta, and I look forward to investigating.
Mark, you haven't got enough time to use more platforms.
Oh, I need all the platforms.
I only wish we all had time to do that, but exactly, it'll be very, very interesting to use the platform and see what we can do with it. Absolutely. Brian, thank you very, very much for your time today. And to all of our listeners, thank you for listening. I hope this has been informative, and please give us any feedback you might have. And until the next time, goodbye from me.
Are you looking for an easy way to buy Bitcoin or Ether on a safe, secure platform? Coinbase is the easiest place to buy and sell digital currencies. Sign up today as a friend of the Blockchain Show, and if you buy or sell $100 of Bitcoin or more, you'll earn $10 of free Bitcoin for yourself and $10 of Bitcoin to support this show. Join now using the link in this episode's show notes at theblockchainshow.com.